A Shalom Akim Shabbat Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh Bashem Hawashai, Bashem Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim. And listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to just recall a conversation I was having with one of my folks, one of my parents. I thought this would be, quite edifying, right? Because, ultimately, as a people, when you look at our condition today, we don't have any physical records to prove, that we are who we say we are, right? But we understand, pursuant to prophecies and pursuant to the curses that are listed in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, that we understand that we are the people of the book, right? And the Lord chose us to be a special people above himself, above all these other nations, right? But we understand that the Lord punished us, due to our iniquities and our idolatrous, behavior, right? So basically, the story goes like this, so I'm having this conversation with one of my my parents, right? So, and they told me, when they were growing up, I would say before teenager, maybe before they were teenager, probably, they used to have, a bread that was made every day. So you have local bakers, they would make this bread. It was a very flat bread, but it was a very warm bread that was commonly made, every day, red, fresh, not like the bread you buy in the store. Anyways, and that was one of the things that stuck out. But one of the major things that stuck out, from what they were discussing and describing, was a bread that didn't have any leavening agents, right? So essentially, it was an unleavened bread. But it was commonly back then, growing up in the Caribbean in the 60s, 70s, it was commonly known as leavened bread, right? But we understand that through a process of time, Jake, essentially the Israelites, they would discontinue from their heritage. But it's more proof to show that we are the people that are actually described within the scriptures, right? Because you have a lot of gainsayers that essentially don't like when we say who we say we are, right? Because pursuant to the prophecy, we understand that we would discontinue from our heritage, right? So let me just start with that, and I'll continue a little bit more with the story, because this is Jeremiah chapter 17 verse 4, and it says, even thyself shall discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. And for ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever, right? So, understand that, we would discontinue from our heritage, right? Through these different laws that the Lord gave us. The Lord, as pursuant to Psalms, the 147th chapter, where it says, he showeth his word, unto Jacob, and his statutes unto Israel, right? So the Lord doesn't deal with all the other nations, right? Pursuant to what the Catholic Church teaches, right? So that's a false doctrine. That's a false understanding, right? So, but the point really is that, when they told me that, because they called this bread, leaven, they called it leaven bread. But it was actually, when they described it, it was actually unleavened, because there were no yeast, there was no leavening agents in it. But it is just kind of showing that different fragments of the culture still, remained. And I'll hit you with another example of something they also shared with me when they were growing up, because back then, growing up, it's basically Jake was living a bit more independently, off the land. So they didn't actually, they didn't have a lot of what you might know as big superstores, big box stores. They had, in the islands, you kind of have your own plot of land, substance, animals, sheep, goats, cattle, whatever it is, right? You might have a small, patch of lettuce and cabbages or whatever. But the point is that she remember when they were growing up, they also used to hear their grandparents say, when you're planting something, don't plant in this portion, of the land, right? Because they would say, they understood that the soil, that was a common saying. They would say that the soil is tired. The soil is very, very tired. I know there's no there's no nutrients here, so you can't plant here for some time, right? So it shows you, that the culture, the further and further away we got from, Jerusalem, we the more fragmented our culture, became, until you get to, Babylon the Great, also known as America. There is very little understanding of who our people are and where they come from, because now they're calling themselves by the different bywords that they commonly know as today, that was given to them by their enemies, right? Rather than calling themselves by the biblical nationalities, right? As a matter of fact, what is that? Isaiah. This is Isaiah chapter 45, verse 4. And it says, "For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel mine elect, I have called thee by thy name, I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me," right? So the Lord, that's our name, right? Our name is not, we're not, niggas and we're not blacks, we're not Negroes, we're not, Native Americans and so on and so forth, or Hispanics, or, green, all these different words that, we're commonly known as Puerto Ricans and all that kind of stuff, right? We're Israelites from, essentially our respective tribes, and the Lord created us to be a holy and a special people through these different laws, statutes, and commandments. But, nevertheless, going really back to the point, their parts of our culture was still reminisce, within their memories, within their mindset, within their mind, I should say, right? So, I wanted to read this in Romans, right? Because those are customs that you find, in the Torah, right? As a matter of fact, let me read that one that I spoke of. Just to show, I'll read this from here. This is Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. And it says, "And the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them that when ye come into the land which I give you, that ye shall the land be a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard, and gather the fruit thereof," right? So you have an allotted time of 6 years to be able to sow the field, sow all the seeds that you need to, right? And then essentially gather the fruits thereof, gather your harvest, your labor, and so on and so forth, right? So to be able to sustain yourselves, because a lot of us, the different tribes, when you go into the time of Joshua, they were allotted their different portions of the land, right? So an exception for the tribe, of Levi, basically, so the different tribes had received their different portions, right? But this is verse 4 here, and it says, "But the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai. Thou shalt neither sow thy field or prune thy vineyard, that which groweth of its own accord of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, neither gather the grapes of thy vine undressed." For it is a year of rest unto the land, right? So this is so in that seventh year, essentially, you would allow the land to basically rest, right? But it really just it goes to show that, it's still, solidifying the point that, we are the people, right? And these were our customs, these are our culture, Christmas, Halloween, New Year's Day, in the Caribbean islands, you have Guy Fawkes, you have Corpus Christi, you have all these different, bizarre different holidays and so on and so forth. Like, we have our own holidays and we have our own culture, right? But, I wanted to, just read that, to kind of further solidify the point, because there's a lot of things that we kept within our customs, but, even though, you might, that applies to a lot of us as well, because like in the world before you had the understanding, well, the Lord opened up our minds to the understanding. It's like, there were certain things within our spirit that we did, but we didn't fully have the understanding of what it is that we were doing, right? This is, let me go to Romans. Let me just read this in Romans here. Like for myself, I always wanted to make sure, I always wanted to have like a beard on my face, right? Even though I can't grow one. This is Romans chapter 2, verse 14, and it says, for when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, right? So the Gentiles in this context refers to the Israelites, foreigners, because understanding that, during when you read a lot of Paul's letters, right, it describes that, okay, ye were Gentiles carried away after dumb idols, and that in the Greek word it says ethnos, so it was speaking to, as a matter of fact, let me get that in Romans. Romans, just to get an understanding of of that here. Romans 1 verse 7, and it says, to all be in Rome, beloved of the Most High, called to be saints. And who are the saints? The saints are Israelites, right? Who made a covenant, with the Most High by sacrifice, right? I think that's Psalms chapter 50, right? So the point here is that those Gentiles were Israelites that fell away from their customs. And to understand that also is to understand that, going back, because this was during the time of the Roman Empire, right? So during the ancient Roman Empire, you had the empire that ruled before them were the Greeks. And where do you find that information about their rulership? Where do you find that information about their different rulers and kings and something we commonly know as Hellenization? You would find that within the Apocrypha. You would find those accounts in the Maccabees, and right. So the point, is that, we fell away from our customs, right? And there was only, you had a lot of Israelites, during the time of Rome that fell away from their customs. They didn't know who they are. That's why James said to the 12 tribes, scattered abroad greeting, right? Because they were essentially, when you go into that word scattered, if I'm not mistaken, it's the word diaspora, right? So that we were essentially cast, all over the world, right? And we became like unto beasts. We became like unto, heathens. We became essentially, as Jeremiah said, we became degenerates of a strange vine, right? Because the Lord actually planted us to be a noble vine, right? So, I was reading this, to solidify, there's a lot of things that, you realize a lot of our people will do without actually having the understanding of knowing that they were Israelites, or knowing that they are Israelites. There's a lot of things within their spirit that they do, right? They might have been, separating from their women, when they were on their menstrual cycle or something, or it could have been, keeping a beard, or it could have been, what I'm saying, like a various different, examples that are contained. Okay, some Israelites probably stayed away from certain dietary foods because they understand. I actually had a lady once tell me that, she's an Israelite as well. She strongly stays away from shellfish because she understands they're bottom feeders, right? So there's a lot of things, and this is not to circumvent the fact that a lot of our people are wicked and do those things, but this is to also understand that yes, we are the people, right? And the scriptures That's our history, that's our culture. Our culture, these different laws, statutes, and commandments, because this is our wisdom and our sight, within the other nations, right? To the other nations, they shall say that this is a great and understanding people, to roughly paraphrase, right? So, let me go here. Because I quoted it. I quoted this a little earlier. This is Psalms chapter 147, verse 19, and it says, He showeth his word unto Jacob, and his statutes and his judgments unto Israel, and he hath not dealt so with any nation. As for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye the Lord Yahweh, right? So the Lord, chose us, he made a covenant with us, right? And we have that understanding, and that those customs, those culture, that was given to us as a people. He didn't give it to all the other nations. He didn't punish the other nations, right, the way he would essentially punish us, right? Because we are supposed to be that noble vine, like I said earlier, right? So, I wanted to just discuss that, quick conversation that I had real quick, because a lot of Israelites, you might listen and you might think that, okay, you may not fit the look of a typical Israelite, but as a matter of fact, let me get this in Isaiah actually, because to show you it is, it is going based off of the seed, right? This is Isaiah 59 verse 20, and it says, and the Redeemer shall come out of Zion, and shall come and unto them that turn from the transgression in Jacob, saith the Lord. As for me, this is my covenant with them, saith the Lord. My spirit is upon thee, and my words that I have put in thy mouth shall not depart of thy mouth, nor out of thy mouth of thy seed, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, saith the Lord Yahweh, for henceforth and forever, right? So it's a seed line. The Lord, we're a chosen bloodline, right? And this is our culture and our customs, right? So, I'll leave the lesson there, but I kind of just wanted to discuss this because I thought that was a very interesting conversation, and understanding that yes, we don't really have records to show that we are the people, but we're fulfilling the prophecies, like the prophecies. We were taken onto slavery on ships, the yoke of iron upon thy neck, we will be cast, scattered all over the world, right? And these are different prophecies that don't fit the people of the land, because they believe that they always knew their heritage, but the scriptures say that they would discontinue from their heritage. And it also says, in the land of their captivity they shall remember themselves. So that also proves that in a time they wouldn't know who they are, right? So these people, there's essentially an inquisition, because a lot of people, not just our people really, but a lot of the heathens, especially Esau, the lower level, like Edomites, they're realizing that the people in the land, they don't fit the mold, they don't fit this so-called blessing that they're trying to pseudo insert themselves to be the people, because they're essentially they're causing a strong rift, they're causing a strong problem with their neighboring nations, right? You even had a statement that was made back in the 50s by one of the old Egyptian presidents. He passed away now, but he said, essentially, to roughly paraphrase, he said, you can never be the people because you left black and came back white, right? I might be kind of messing that up, but if you type in, his name is Gamal Nasser, right? He was one of the presidents of Egypt, right? And he made a very strong statement, and it's true, because the original biblical Israelites were a people, of color, right? So, it essentially, through apostles and elders on down, they've been tearing down these different strongholds, right? But essentially, we're starting to see a third witness, pointing out that these people, they don't fit the mold of what the biblical Israelites are supposed to be like, right? So, I just thought, I'll just, share share this conversation real quick, right? To kind of like, to essentially as a boost of faith, right? Because like I said, we don't really have, like in the time of Ezra, we didn't have like the records or the genealogy, right, to be able to prove certain things, right? So, anyways, I'll leave the lesson there. But Lord's will, this lesson was quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.